as part of our IFA workshop, Knowledge to Act and Challenging Inequalities. Particular thank you again on the streaming to our INSEE colleagues. It's great to have you with us. So before we start in introducing our topic of the day and our wonderful speaker, I would just like to make a couple of exciting announcements. So the new call for the Cross-Cultural Fellowship will start in November and is up on the IFA website. So please spread it, whether you are interested in the fellowship or know people who could be, or interested in becoming a host organization, please go on the website and get in touch with IFA. And another exciting news, after lots of work, the Knowledge to Act publication is finally out, and you will be able to find it very shortly on the IFA website as well. So now, without further ado, let's dive into our topic of the day. Another light topic for us: how to overcome institutionalized discrimination. Quite a mouthful topic, but in many ways it comes and follows a little bit what we had yesterday talking about gender. As we already touched upon, discrimination can take many shapes and forms. Targets of discrimination can be based on gender, on religion, race, political belief, sexual orientation, and unfortunately so many others. And the form of discrimination is unfortunately, historically and presently, very systemic, from the language we use every day to the opportunities that are available for different people, and in the policies and many other ways. This systemic, institutionalized, structured discrimination unavoidably has the consequence of creating inequalities in our various societies across the globe, and lack of collective ownership, the creation of multiple challenging narratives, sometimes not always in accordance with fact-based argumentation, that eventually, sadly, but humanly and legitimately and understandably to a certain extent, can lead to radicalization and to violence. And so to explore all of these points, and especially our main question of the day about institutionalization of discrimination and its consequences on radicalization, I'm extremely happy to have three different experts coming from three different countries, from Belarus, Tunisia, and Germany, to help us think a little bit about all these different aspects. So we'll first have the pleasure to hear from Olga Karatch, who is one of the founders of the peace movement in Belarus and so many other things. So without further ado, Olga, please, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you very much for the possibility to speak today. And I would like to just give you a very short information what happens in Belarus now. On August 9, 2020, we were held the president elections. And since the day, we have second month of the peaceful, absolutely peaceful protest in Belarus. And if early Belarusians went to the streets only because they protested against the stealing of their voices, now people are shocked by very unbelievable, brutal repressions, murders, and even rapes by forces in Belarusian prison. Unfortunately, we have the cases when Belarusian police raped even children participating in the peaceful protest. And now more than 200 people are convicted under criminal cases, but it's important to say that the people didn't do anything bad. They just victims of the violence, of the tortures, and they're trying to complain to the police and to fix the tortures. Now they imprison it, and the police try to make clear any signs of the tortures. But in total, we have 20,000 people who was under tortures, including rapes, including very serious physical tortures, physical violence, and the break of arms, legs, back, or ruptures of the rectum by from the police batons in the prison. And of course, our society is really, really shocked in such kind of to see such kind of stories and such kind of violation. Since August 9, 2020, we had real war in Belarus. People were shooting, we have many tanks, military equipment, and it's very important to say that the radicalization is going on only from one side, the side of Alexander Lukashenko. And if we speak about Belarus in general, now we see very, very classic struggle between brutal, masculine men with very patriarchal thinking, very patriarchal mind, and brave, active women, feminist women, as me, for example, and others, who is for diversity, for gender equality, for democracy, for human rights. And the situation is very similar like the situation with domestic violence. And why now in Belarus we speak about domestic violence so often? Because Lukashenko has behavior like very typical home abuser, psychopath, and with gaslighting, with non-respect to women, to children, etc., etc. And if we speak about radicalization of Lukashenko's side, it's very important to speak about anonymization of his enforcers. Now we have the problem that all enforcers, it's not clear who is the guys. This is very strong men with weapons, who is ready to kill and who already killed people without any identification numbers, even in cars, in black uniform. And this is very similar like what was happens in Belarus during Soviet time, during NKVD, KGB period, when we had the same massive repressions of peaceful people. And by my opinion, this is one of the way to cut off the radicalization from the Belarusian enforcers is the way how to make them de-anonymous. And this is what our society and different grassroots groups are working now, how to identify the people who is even in prisons using balaclavas, black balaclavas, and you could imagine this is like men who doesn't show the faces, you know, any identification signs. And usually our practice is shown that if we know the people, they stop any kind of repressions and they stop any kind of brutal violence. Secondly, it's very important to say that we need reflections. We need reflections about our historical memory and the bridge to the brutal violence now on Belarusian streets, because it's very connected. And of course, in this situation in Belarus, we have unbelievable increasing of cultural revolution, like art, songs, dance, and many other things, like reflection of peaceful Belarusian for the mothers, for the kidnapping people, kidnapping children, because one of very, very serious threat which women have in Belarus now, this is kidnapping of children by anonymous enforcers from the families of women activists. And this is very serious threat. And again, nothing is new. Everything was before, but now it's much more visible. It's much more massive. And of course, in this situation, we have very, very clear, if you speak about men, radical men, brutal men, masculine men with patriarchal style of mind, of course, they try to organize gender-based repressions against women. So first of all, I already spoke about to kidnap children from the families of active women in Belarus, to put women to mental health institutions, like when woman is kidnapped and then forces put her to the mental health institutions, and of course some kind of economical pressure for women, because if you are a woman and you are participating in peaceful protest, and you are detained, so you can receive, of course, 15 days of prison or 1 month of prison, but at the same time you receive quite huge fine, something like 500 or even more dollars per one participation. But at any way, women continue to go to Belarusian streets, and women continue to protest. And of course, every weekend, for example, on Saturday, we have only women's March of Solidarity. And tomorrow it will be the Women's March of Solidarity in many countries, not only in Belarus. And of course, women understand it's risky, but continue to do, because Lukashenko is absolutely toxic for Belarusian society and for Belarusian women, especially after the rapes of Belarusian children in prison. It's unbelievable. It's something unbelievable. It's impossible even to explain. Maybe our society could accept in some kind of way only killings of people, of protesters, but rapes of peaceful protesters by police batons, it's impossible. And now our society starts to be very, very sensitive to any discrimination. Of course, if I speak about our society, I mean the Russian part of peaceful protesters. And now we have unbelievable discussion about Belarusian culture as non-violent culture of protest. And in this way, we have many discussions what means non-violent peaceful conflict resolution for us. Because on another side, this is men with and this is killers. How we can stop them with peaceful methods, with peaceful way. And of course, this is a very sensitive discussion. For example, if women use voice against policemen, if you are crying like this is peaceful or not, or if you use X against policemen, this is peaceful or not. But this is very important discussion for us, because many years Belarusian society keep the silence, and some kind of topics have very strong taboo, especially for the historical repressions of KGB and KVD and everything what was happened during last 100 years in Belarus. And of course, another very important tool for us, this is some kind of sanctions against the radical men. It means public boycott. If we know the enforcers and the names, it means that the enforcers, actually for them, this is very sensitive. If they're going to public transport, of course, all people leave transport. If they're going to shop, all people are leaving the shop. If they try to communicate with somebody, this is some kind of silence around them, because of course we are very peaceful. We cannot answer for the violence, we cannot answer for the killings, but we can show that the situation is not normal. And of course, in this situation, we have some kind of entrepreneurship and some kind of organizations who support Lukashenko and enforces openly. In this situation, they have the same public boycott from many people. And of course, now we have even the special app, it's called Shop. If you're supporting Lukashenko and his enforcers, it means that nobody can buy anything in the shop. And this is very, very effective tool of pressure for Lukashenko, because before he was very full of energy, and he had the imagine that he can stop the peaceful protest using the violence and using weapons. It's impossible to explain what we feel. Like, for example, we organize protest action and near we see the river, and you see on the river you see the tanks. You know, it's for us as Belarusians, it's so strange to see so many military equipment and so many military forces to fight against women. But at the same time, we feel that they're much weaker than we are. Even with all weapons, with all rapes, with killings, with kidnapping of people, they cannot stop us, but we can stop them. And I would like to say that now, in this situation in Belarus, if we speak about discrimination and if we speak about radicalization, we need to develop our international cooperation. We need to develop our communication with the whole world, because people who is out around Lukashenko, they feel very bad with the isolation. Sometimes isolation is very, very, again, effective tool to pressure for people, even for killers, even for people who is rapers. And by my opinion, gender equality now is very important key point for any development of peaceful protest in Belarus. Because I would like to remember the resolution 3025, where gender equality is a very clear criteria of stability and peace in the region. And why now in Belarus, when we are organizing the peaceful protest, it's very, very important. The female agenda is so important for all protests, even for men, not only for women, but women are leading of Belarusian protest all positions, from the president of Belarus now until the women on very grassroots level who is organizing any kind of flash mobs, actions, art events, or any kind of dancing actions, etc. Yes, and this is something what I would like to share with you, and I have presentation with a description of the situation in Belarus. Maybe if for somebody it would be interesting to receive, I'm very open to receive it, and I will be open to get your questions about Belarus and how we fight against radicalization of Belarusian enforcers and stop the killings now. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Olga, for this courageous and heart-wrenching testimonial of discrimination and political discrimination on the ground. Thank you very much for your courage. Thank you. Moving to another country who actually went through its fair share of political discrimination, even though that will partly be his topic today, but not all of it. I'd like to give the floor to Moez Ali, who is the co-founder and president of UTIL, the Union of Independent Tunisians for Freedom. Moez, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you to IFA and INSI for having me here. I'm talking from Tunisia, and you know that Tunisia went through a very sensitive moment since 2010 with the uprising, with the democratic transition, with what you call Arab Spring. Is a term that I don't like very much, but still, at least it helped implementing a lot of positive dynamics, but I don't want to, it does not mean that they are effective. So for example, we have the new constitution that really anchor the equality, that take off all this gender issue, the equality between men and men in opportunities, in rights, in freedom, between all the individuals as well. And also the Assembly or the Parliament adopted in 2018 a non-discrimination law. So that really erase any kind of issue, that kind of discrimination within the society. However, and I'm going to mention 3 different topics. The first topic is with LGBT issues. First of all, we need to keep in mind that we are an Arab country. We are what we call a Muslim country, according to the constitution. However, we had a lot of dynamics, because we know that when we had the dictatorship till 2010, when we say dictatorship, we say institutionalized discrimination in many forms. However, now that we are going through the democratic transition, we had a lot of texts that were adopted, the constitution, all the anti-discrimination law, and also there was a lot of dynamic, even initiated by the president of the government in 2017, to renounce, sorry for the term, for all the annual exam as an evidence of homosexuality practices, and also they worked on this, on decriminalization of the homosexual practices. All this have been done, very good. However, August 2020, the court issued a law, a sentence against homosexual for homosexual practices, based on an old penal text of 2030 that sentenced up to 3 years all the homosexual practices. And why? Because it's against morality and decency. So we can have all the texts we want and all the positive dynamics, but still we have an institutionalized discrimination toward the LGBTs in Tunisia. I'm going to mention another example for the women. You know that Tunisia is the first Arab country that really granted the total freedom to the woman and promoted equality between women and men. However, despite we have more university graduate women, we, for example, every time we have a president of the government, he tried to promote the equality in the composition of the government, to have the same number of men and women. But at the end, they are really, they fail in having this equality, because we are really, we have an issue in accepting the woman in the higher-ranked positions. And I think despite all the law, we signed the CEDAW agreement, we signed all the international convention, we signed everything. But unfortunately, I would say the system does not accept the woman as a full, as a person who can bring who can bring something to the government, who can bring something new, being in higher ranked positions. And then, just to go back in history, in 2000, before the uprising, we got, let's say, 2 parts of Tunisia, the coastal part and the inner part. So the coastal part was very privileged, and of course, they were, most of the decision makers, all the higher ranked positions, all the ministers, they were coming from this area. After the uprising, so the inner part of was really discriminated. And so we could not almost find anyone from decision unless he really joined the political party in power. So no one had access, because we had a very institutionalized discrimination towards any person coming from this region. After the uprising, as let's say, maybe as a revenge, the situation is reversed. So the coastal areas people are becoming subject to institutionalized discrimination. And we kind of labeled all the inner governorate as a first priority governorate. So everything needs to go there to upgrade the economic situation there. And I'm going to mention another fourth example. We can have a very good central situation. That means the central government promote rights and is fighting against discrimination. But when we go to the local level, particularly in the stigmatized areas, even though the central authority does not accept any form of discrimination, on the local level, particularly in stigmatized areas, there is a small or local institutionalized discrimination. And we note that in the behavior of the police towards the local citizens. For example, I can have my ID card because I'm living in a good area. I can have my ID card in, let's say, 2 weeks. But in this stigmatized area, a young person, because he's just coming from there, he will have his ID card in 2 months. When we compare the public services, so we see that the situation in other areas are better, but in this stigmatized area, they're the worst. And I'm going to share something. It's a study that we did in one of the stigmatized areas. And we have the perceived problem of Tunisia in this area in Sidi Hassin, where there is almost 100,000 citizens, where they are not connected by the public transportation. They are getting really a very, or let's say, very small public transportation as logistics and a very poor public services. And then we asked them, we see that we had 23 criteria, sorry, because it's French: unemployment, terrorism, violence, deterioration of this economic situation, poverty, corruption, justice, marginalization, problem of transport, school dropout, deterioration of infrastructure, the inclusivity of youth, drugs, the weak educational system, robbery, nepotism, and police repression. So when we ask them, we have all these 23 criteria, and we asked over 4,000 persons from this community. And these particular issues, sometimes the institutionalized discrimination, there is a system that is implemented that is really discriminating, but also the citizens of the locality, they perceive the system or the local authorities as discriminated institutions, because they consider them as the source of the problem. And all these reasons, and I connected to the others, are the main pull and push factors that can lead the young persons when we have all this weak situation, when we have the bad guys really freely operating in their neighborhood, being radicalized or being violent. And another study we conducted, and this is one of the projects that we are working on, because we were called to develop a national strategy in countering violence and violent extremism in public schools. And we worked on the age range of 12 to 14. Why 14? Because the highest rate of school dropout is at the age of 14. We found out that the kids, they are really normalizing with violence. They are really considering violence as a way to defend themselves and to impose themselves. So, and why I'm mentioning this, just to underline that the young person are really prepared and how I can say this, and programmed to consider violence as a way of expression. So violence with institutional discrimination, with the absence of the recruiters of the radical groups, and then we know where it takes. And when we talk about deradicalisation, okay, we know Tunisia is very well known because we went through a lot of issues with young people being radicalized to go to Syria and to join the radical groups. And I was one, myself and my organization contributed in developing a lot of international strategies, such as the reform and integration of fighters, or implementing the prevention, the PBE strategy. the term deradicalisation. You see, it's very easy. It's a very common sentence. We use it everywhere. We hear it. We see it in all the international conferences. But are we really able to deradicalize a person if we don't change the, or we don't eradicate the factors that made him radicalized? Just to take some examples, in Belgium, yeah, maybe they managed to deal with some returnees, or they are dealing with some radical in dealing to solve the issues of radicalized neighborhoods. But the problem is that taking in the security approach as a main solution, it's useless. And seeking a short-term approach to de-radicalize a person, it's also useless. It's de-radicalizing a person, it's a process. First, we need to change what is around him, then start working on what is inside him. And we can go and see the experience of the CPRV, RMV in Montreal, who are dealing with violence that can lead to extremism. And we all agree that de-radicalization, it's a very difficult process. First of all, we need to have the proper legal framework. We need to have the proper institutions. We need to have a strategy for that and a multi-stakeholder approach. And I think in many countries, as far as I know, I never saw any successive de-radicalization strategy in any way. Maybe in Saudi Arabia, because in the centers, they have swimming pools. And so, yeah, they can have a good time, but that does not mean that they can radicalize them. And to end, taking into consideration all these kind of issues, first of all, I think to tackle this issue, to overcome all these problems, we need to have a strategy, first of all. And we know that in our part of the world, we hear a lot about strategies, about the leader taking a decision or giving instructions, but developing a strategy is having a multi-stakeholder approach, tackling the problem from all the issues, putting taxes, but not only implementing laws and taxes, but also prepare the people to accept them. Because as I mentioned in the LGBT, if we put taxes and we put laws and no one recognizes them, it's useless. So we need to have a political will, social justice and social inclusion. And this is really, and having these two parts, it's the end or the result of a process. Personally, I consider that we need to have new leaders. We need to have new leaders because, for example, in Tunisia, having a president of the parliament, because the parliamentary regime was over 80, we had the president last year who passed away, and he was over 90. I don't know how with this kind of person, or at this age, I'm not doing any kind of discrimination here, but we need to have a new vision. We need to have a fresh sight. We need to have a good strategy and to develop the multi-stakeholder approach to promote democracy in schools. And this is another issue. We need to promote democracy in schools and civic engagement, because citizenship education or any kind or any civic engagement, it's not a course that we take 2 hours a week. It's a mode of living. And as long as we don't dare, and I say dare, tackling this kind of reform, we will not be able to overcome all these kind of issues. And we need to consolidate the identity of being a citizen in a civil state and avoid creating identity issues. And I think, and to end, we need to prevail the rule of law over morality and decency. And this is what we noticed when I talked about the LGBT situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Moez. Thank you for stressing on the importance of rule of law when it comes to creating equal opportunities and at all levels. All right. So last but not least, we're going to hear from both practitioner and researcher, Harald Weilnböck, I hope I pronounced that right, who's been specializing on good practice methods in prevention and rehabilitation in school and prison settings, focusing this time on right-wing extremism. Harald, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Nelly, for introducing. I hope you can hear me well. Well, thanks for inviting me here. I've been listening also, before we started the streaming, and it was extremely interesting, where you come from discussing issues of discrimination and then trying to, to build the bridge to issues of radicalization. But first of all, to my fellow speakers, it's such an interesting situation to be in here, and in Germany, looking at Belarus towards the east, and then looking south, and Olga, a quick word to you. I mean, this is I wouldn't even I would hesitate to use the word radicalization for, because this is point blank a state terrorism, period, and it's been there, poisonous, toxic military state terrorism, and it's a unique situation that from central middle European or from EU perspective. And well, let's try to partner up. And I think I've already sent you an email, or I will soon. We're trying to work with right now we are in Ukraine with a little project, and trying to do more in Central and Eastern Europe. So there's nothing more I can say about that. A lot to Moez. We also talked about what to actually do. How does it actually work to to teach democracy and human rights, and to with in schools with young people. I mean, normally people speak about radicalization as the ism, as the topic, as the problem, and then there's certain definitions and issues, and my topic really is the question of what to do. How could you intervene, or how could you educate, actually? But in listening to you, and try to actually, if I can just show you, it reminded me in listening to you talking about discrimination. I quickly share, I thought back, and in one project I did almost 10 years ago, gender and extremism, women and gender and extremism prevention, which basically I devised that in 2012 and 13, I think, because in working in issues of radicalization and prevention in Germany means two or three things. Basically, the so-called Islamism, which we were all taught is the most important thing, which in fact it is not. Then second, but really most important, right-wing extremism. That is sort of the inborn, the homegrown sort of group hatred in Europe and in Germany. And once you look at all that, we came to actually study gender issues, because we realized at the heart of every form of violent extremism, be it religious or political, it's gender issues and nothing else. And ideology and religion comes much later. You realize this instantly if you work with with the young people, and also with the people in prison. Then how much gender matters to them emotionally, not even ideologically so much. And it comes back. It's a bit here. It's a bit abstract in its formulation, but basically our observation was all the extremisms are sexist and homophobic. This is one of their, and that's not only a side by characteristic, it's really sort of the heart of the motivation. And in just listening to you, it made it all the more evident how much that is true. So that just came to my mind when I listened to you. I stopped it right away, because please cut me off in 5 minutes. I hate to talk too long. Trying to give you an idea of what my normal work is, really, thinking about how to do derad work that Moez was already referring to. We worked with the European Commission, and I brought you basically I brought you two topics, and the The first is, I think it might make sense in about 2 or 3 minutes only to run down a couple of principles of actually how to do prevent work and exit work, because it's really all is the same. And I very much agree with Moez, who said basically, it's a very complicated long-term process. It's not an easy thing. It's not a lesson that you teach. And that is the first thing. And the second thing in another 2 or 3 minutes is a particular thing that we do in schools, which we call narrative dialogue or narrative groups. And I'll be with that in a second, just explaining what that is and why we do it this way and not in any other more debate-oriented or more argument-oriented way, but in a narrative way instead. You may actually go to this publication if you're more interested, but I give you the gist of it actually. If you are dealing with a young person that's been a young neo-Nazi for a couple of years, then things are really very complicated. And one of the basic principles of your work should be a personal trust building with that person. Be aware before you start even, because that actually governs everything you do with that person, be it in a group or be it individually. And the second thing we found that throughout our years of work in Germany and Eastern Germany in particular, but in all Germany, is building trust. It also comes with respect, interacting on eye levels, and appreciation, and non-discrimination, to speak in the words of today, non-discrimination of your clients. And as a practitioner, you have to be able to actually do this in a sense. You have to be able to respect and look into the eye of a young neo-Nazi and work with him. I say that so clearly because among my colleagues, that is not always that easily given, and you have to be you have to know that ahead of time, because many of my colleagues actually come out from political work, and they are center left, and from there to sort of brace up and be ready to respect and work with a young neo-Nazi needs a certain change of your attitude and certain kind of preparation. So that therefore the second base principle is personal respect towards anybody, including young radicals or young extremists. And the rest then goes with relationship building, which, as Moez said, takes time. Actually, an exit process can take up to 2 years. It's almost something like a psychotherapy. I often compare it with that. It's a very intensive process of working on your personality. For that, of course, you need a safe space, which is confidential. So whenever you're starting to do something in that area, just make sure that you know what your setting is, where you work. Do you have a safe space? Can you actually act confidential? Is it a given? And if not, then at least be very open about this with the young people that you want to work with. If you work in schools, or I also sometimes not too much, but I sometimes worked in prisons as well. If you work in institutions, make sure that you're actually external, that you're not staff. If you can afford it, and make sure that that the institution actually lets you in and accepts you as an external, because with this externality, you actually bring an extra option of trust, because you can make a very clear case that you're not going to speak about the things to anybody. You're not involved in grading the students. You're not involved in talking to the prison governor about what the future fate of the individual is. So being an external might be key in the process. And then once you get into talking to the young person, be it an individual or be it a group, then we have something like a principle of open process, which is actually quite difficult for many of my colleagues who come out of teaching or who come out of training, because many trainers and teachers have a session plan or an agenda or a syllabus, and then they start doing something with a certain agenda. So open process means you go into a safe space and you don't have an agenda. You're just there as a person to interact. So in that sense, you are most participatory. and open to, you know, what the issues of your client actually is once he or she starts to talk to you, and be as frank as he or she can be. The next principle follows from that quite logically. You know, things need to be voluntary, and the narrative mode is something that, how do I explain that? I mean, narrative basically means you share experiences, you tell something that you have experienced. It's quite different from actually having a debate or an argument. It's a totally different ballgame. So all we do actually also in the group work we do in schools revolves around applying techniques of conversation that invite our counterparts to actually share something. Not give an argument, not give an opinion. You know, if you give an opinion, then ask back the person, you know, what experience is behind that opinion. So these are actually, to make it short and not really speak too long, you know, it's all about emotional intelligence, about social skills. And if you have a chance to actually work in a group setting, that would be most valuable, because there's just so much going on emotionally and socially in a group. So I generally prefer that from individual work, while groups are sometimes also quite dynamic, which is why we always have a timeout zone with our group work, where you can have an individual follow-up one-on-one if things get too tense in one way or another. And the last point I already made, the only issue why we do not have an agenda, and actually we do not have an agenda if we go into our settings of work, there's one particular issue that we pick up first, and it always comes along, and this is the gender issue. You know, LGBT, you know, sexism, you know, men, women, it comes up with young people, with older people. You can bet on it, and once it's there, you know, you welcome the topic and you dive into it much more. Other than that, we actually really don't have any agenda. And looking at the clock, I already see I should really only do this one slide here, and then just, you know, see where you are coming from, what questions you might have. But just to explain how we work in schools, and Moez, it might be interesting for you or for anybody who has a chance to work in schools, but not to be too quick. Actually, we go into a classroom, and then basically there is a 5 of us, quite many people, I mean, external people. And then we divide the class in 2 halves, because then you have sort of 10, 12 people. And with 10, 12 people, you can actually do group work. So in a sense, we have the divided 2 groups, and with each of the groups, we have 2 facilitators, male, female, if we can. And then these 2 groups just work, you know, separate in a separate room. And just if anything happens, or people need a break, or individuals need a break, or people are just too unruly and we need to send them to have a break, we have our 5th colleague in a timeout zone, which is a 3rd room. It's a very simple setting. It's not so simple actually if you have to organize it with a school, but it's actually quite simple from its logic. And then, and that might be my finishing line, actually, the two I'd almost call them mediators, but facilitators, they go into the group and they basically say, well, that's your time. You know, we just give you the frame, you know, discuss or you share whatever is on your mind. And the only question that we have for you, if you don't have anything right now, is that we ask you, how are you doing? How are you doing at school? How are you doing in life? And that's it. And just imagine 10, 15-year-olds. I mean, the things are coming up in 5 minutes. And you can just go on, and we train our facilitators to do what we call the narrative technique. You know? I could go on and train you on that. It's not that evident, but it sort of entices young people to share experiences that they actually lived through, and not discuss opinions that they've gotten somewhere. And if things get specific in terms of a specific conflict or 2 group issues, then we have a couple of variations and mediation settings on the side which we can put in. So that a very rushed look into, you know, what our work is once it comes down to the questions of, you know, once state terrorism is over, you know, I mean, let's hope for Belarus and any other place in the world, you know, once that's taken care of, and once you have you have time and space to ask yourself, well, how do we clean it up? How do we educate? Then this would be my topic, and this is sort of my methods that I would then love to convey to you whenever you have time and space for it and want to try it out. That much from my side, and I'm eager to hear. I'm stopping my presentation, so we have our faces already again. Yeah, eager to hear what you have to say, what questions you have, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much, Harald. Thank you very much. I once heard, I think it was a TED Talk about the best way to deal with addictions, drug addictions, was connections. And that sentence you said, be able to look in the eye of a neo-Nazi and work with him. It's all about creating connections and collective ownership. And it's challenging for everyone, but I do agree. I think that's the beginning. So I will now would like to turn to our discussions with the fellows. So I would like to thank all of our INSEE colleagues for following us, and anyone else who followed us through the channel, the IFA YouTube channel, or on Facebook. Thank you very much to our audience, and hope to see you very soon and start